So good morning. Hello. Thank you very much for being with us today. So the agenda of this panel. So we'll start with a short presentation of the panelists, and then after we start diving in a fascinating topic because we'll talk about sustainable governance. So this is something that is really at stake nowadays with all the things we are currently living. And then after, we'll go into we'll talk about all these topics. Okay, so let's start by presentation. So ladies first. So Caroline, please.
So good morning. My name is Caroline Kotze. I am the founder and Chief Equality Officer at Women in Governance. I am based in Montreal. I'm originally from Lebanon, grew up through the Lebanese Civil War. And when I arrived in Canada, I had a very strong focus on advancing my career, soon to discover that there are no legends when it comes to sticky floors or glass ceilings. My own career skyrocketed all the way to executive vice president of one of the largest Canadian medical expertise firms. And this is when I realized that there were very few women in the boardroom, very few women in decision-making bodies, and decided to found Women in Governance that just celebrated its 10th anniversary in 2020. The topic of sustainable governance is, of course, very near and dear to my heart. We do a lot of work around that topic and making sure that not only shareholders are happy, but all stakeholders, and how to do that in a fashion that we ensure that everyone in society is able to contribute fully and bring their perspectives to all important decision-making bodies.
Thank you. Great. So Bertrand, please.
Yes, I'm Betrand Badre. I'm based in Washington. I'm coming from the dark side of finance. I've explored all corners of finance for 20 years. My last official visible job was managing director of the World Bank here in Washington. I've left the World Bank where I discovered the beauty of international governance, being the World Bank guy, the G7, the G20, the Financial Stability Board, working on the Paris Conference on climate and so on and so forth. And then I've created my own investment fund to finance the sustainable development goals in emerging markets, starting with Latin America. And I'm also I've been also appointed by President Macron to co-lead the One Planet Lab work with Nick Stern and Paul Polman. So I'm very interested in the role of finance in international governance, which I think has to be deeply reshuffled.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Okay, so Eric, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Eric Gavelan. I'm the current president of World Future Studies Federation. And I also is advisor to the current Minister of Education and Research in the Norwegian government. I came into this field approximately for 25 years ago. I was heading a huge comprehensive project for the Norwegian government called Norway 2030. In that project, we both start to develop methodological approaches and different simulation package to try to think long-term within the government, the political administrative system. So the topic today is so very much concern of myself. I'm very concerned about what is sustainable government. So I think this is an extremely important topic. I also is a co-editor in chief of European Journal of Futures Research, which is a journal aimed at publishing articles within the futures field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a quick word about myself. So I'm a scientific director of MSc program. The name is International Strategy and Influence, and also have some responsibilities in different organizations, international organizations. Yes. Okay. So we're going to start diving into the topic. So the first question, since Eric, you mentioned the current situation. So, in a nutshell, what are the governance lessons that we learn from this pandemic, according to you?
Yeah, I want to recall an article that I read it was published in New York Times by Charlie Warzel in 13th of April 2020, just in the beginning phase of the current crisis. And what he actually did in that article was, I think, is very important, because he pointed at, I think it was 4 uncertainties that we had to deal with these new corona crisis. And that's also 47 uncertainties that, you know, the virologists, the experts haven't dealt with so far, also within epidemiological activities. So it's underlined that this situation is a totally new one that we have to deal with in the different way, and we don't know yet how to deal with it. And that was a very, very, in my opinion, a very, very important important aspect. And the big question that this article and a lot of other things raise is, how are we as a government or as a political administrative system supposed to deal with this kind of uncertainties, which, you know, could, you know, that other situation could occur with also a lot of uncertainties. How is a political administrative system able to deal with fundamental uncertainties? That's the main thing, the lesson.
Yeah, indeed, it's a very important question. Caroline.
Well, so what I've discovered through this pandemic is that the situation relative to gender equality is one that is, and we knew that already, but one that is not very stable. It's very easy to lose a lot of the progress that we've been making over the past decades. Some people are talking about losing 20 or 30 years on the advancement of women. Through this pandemic, we've seen a lot of women leave the workforce for many reasons. Women have been losing their jobs at a much higher rate than men. They compose 39% of the world's labor force, yet they lost their jobs at a rate of 54%. There's a décalage, there's a discrepancy there. Women are still to this day globally doing 75% of what we call invisible work. So taking care of children, taking care of aging parents, taking care of the home, and they are being increasingly, there are increasing demands on them, and we've been told that women feel that they've added about 2 hours to their day. So there are the women who are losing their jobs, and there are the women who are electing to leave the workforce because they're just exhausted. They just can't cope anymore. We actually have an event on Monday at Women in Governance where the National Director of Public Health is going to be talking about that topic alongside the CEO of the Health and Safety Commission for Employment. So it's a situation that we're very concerned about. Women are 51% of the population. They are 60% of university graduates. They are more than 80% of buying decision making. Yet we've seen even before the pandemic that there were only 5% of top 500 CEOs. They're still to this day barely above 20% of board seats that are occupied by women here in Canada. In France, the situation is a lot better. It's double, actually. With the Loi Co-panelists, there's 40% plus of women on boards. The Loi Co-panelists, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary on January 27th, and I will also be holding a fireside chat that day with Marie-Josée Merman, the deputy who wrote the quotas law. We don't have any legislation in Canada or in the US in favor of women on boards. So, you know, Simone de Beauvoir used to say, you're going to have to be vigilant throughout your whole life, because the minute that there is a crisis, whether it's religious, political, social, you are going to lose your rights. And this is what we are witnessing today. Very concerning to me.
Thank you very much. Bertrand, what do you...
Well, I think this crisis has emphasized the divide of the world. Actually, We just exited the financial crisis 10 years ago. We've done the minimal work after this crisis. We patched up the system. We prevented the dislocation of the global economy, but we did not address the fault line of the system. And then the pandemic came. The advanced economies, the US, the EU, Canada, etc., have been able to flush the economy with money and support. At the same time, the international organizations say, oh, the emerging and developing world needs $2 to $3 trillion of support. The G20 put a meeting together and they committed few billions instead of few trillions. And so if you discuss international governance, there is a big issue there. It's everybody first, and not only America first, but everybody has been looking inward. And so I think we've profoundly regressed on that front from a governance perspective. That's my first point. My second point, it also shows that despite a significant number of international organizations with a lot of people specialized like WHO on health, we don't have a place in the world where people pay attention to the alert. What's going on? What's threatening the resilience of our system? So people are focused on climate, on inequalities, on health, etc. But then you miss the next crisis. And so what I think we miss is a place where all these big organizations can work together effectively as a system, not just as silos, to basically identify early enough the signs that might threaten the world. I'm fascinated. When you were in Davos earlier this year, in January 2020, almost no words on the COVID, believe it or not. So
Yes.
we are blind. We are blind and focused on our inward problem.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you very much for that feedback. So, in fact, we should break the silos and build some early warning system and reconcile strategic approach with the sustainability, because at the end, what we could see is that many organizations were focusing on the short term and just considering the cost and how much they could gain from that without considering the long-term consequences. If we win today, but we destroy everything for tomorrow, at the end there will be only losers, and we reach the limitations of such organization and such a governance, as underlined by some different scientists and some guys from the World Future Study Federation, but also there were also some people from the MIT who made some very pessimistic on the future of the humankind. So I think that now we need to really tackle the changes and make things to have a future. That's the point. We really have to fight for that. So my second question, so according to you, how can we reconcile strategy and sustainability? So I will start with Bertrand, because Bertrand will leave in around 15 minutes.
Well, I think it's back to square one. Actually, as I said, after the global financial crisis of 2007, 8, 9, we patched up a system which we have not really redesigned. And what is this system about? It's anchored on a principle put together 50 years ago in September 1970 by Milton Friedman, the great Chicago economist, who said the social purpose of business is to maximize profit. It worked pretty well for a while. But when you realize when profit is an end to an end, this creates some issues. And it had an impact on all the norms and standards that lead our economic life, from compensation policy to accounting standards to governance to fiduciary duties. I mean, everything which is regulating everything we do in economy is predicated on profit being an end to an end. So if we don't address that core problem and move profits from being an end to an end to profits being a means to an end, meaning profit is legitimate when it's useful, connected to something useful for the world, useful for the people of this world, we will not get there. And that's really, I think, the job of the next 10, 20 years. It will take time, but if we don't open the hood, if we don't take our tools, and if we don't work on the engine, we will always rely on the goodwill of few pioneers, few trailblazers. Hey, look at this great company, look at this great NGO, look at this great organization, and we'll hide ourselves behind this. And it's very unlikely that collectively we will tackle the challenges we are facing, and namely the environmental and social challenges which are already there. So I think it's absolutely crucial that we start working on that. The big issue is that, contrary to 1970, where the US and the UK, actually the Anglo-Saxon, had a clear leadership on this, there is no master of the world today. And actually there are competing views of the world, including from China. And so it's pretty difficult to imagine where it's going to coming from. I believe, being French and European, even if I live in the US, that Europe has a particular say in that perspective. I think, and the fact that Europe stick to the Green Deal in particular is a good signal. It's not enough, but it's going in the right direction. But for me, it's essential that we don't fool ourselves. If we don't change the system itself, and again, I know I'm French, so when you say that, people say, "Oh, the French, they like the revolution, they want to kill everybody, etc. They want for the grand soir." I don't mean a grand soir. I mean a reform over time, because if we don't really change the rules, it's going to be fragile, and on top of that, it's going to be prone to washing. People will pretend they do things, and it's not going to be serious. If we really want to be serious about these challenges that we are facing, I think we have to do the homework. And it's not fun. It's not. When you don't go on TV in prime time to discuss accounting standards, that's very difficult. But it is absolutely essential. And the last point, if I may, is that we should also look at ourselves. I like to quote Tolstoy. In War and Peace, one of the heroes say, "Everybody wants to change the world. Nobody wants to change himself." And nobody will make the decision for us. If we're incapable to change ourselves, don't expect the others to do the job for you. So I think we're at a crucial moment. We have to finish the job that has been unfinished after the previous crisis. This COVID crisis is another wake-up call that things are not totally normal. We have to move. And it has to start with all of us here on this virtual gathering, as consumers, as investors, as workers, as entrepreneurs, as civil servants, as whatever. This is where it's starting. There is no master of the world that will make the decision for us. And that's, maybe it's good, maybe it's a pity, but that's it. And it's relatively urgent. I'm optimistic because we never had that much money. We never had that much technology. We have all the tools available. I mean, many people have spent a lot of time during the lockdown to do puzzles. I think now we have all the pieces of the puzzles. We need a little bit of leadership and cooperation spirit to put the pieces together.
Thank you very much. Caroline.
Well, I think I'm optimistic in terms of the willpower of the corporate world. Traditionally, we've been working on developing women's leadership. This was our action 10 years ago. We were thinking, okay, women need to be more bold, more audacious. They need to come out of their comfort zone. And we were putting a lot on the lack of female talent on women, or what they called lack of pipeline. The reality was that women were actually educated, they were actually ambitious, they were actually experienced, and it was more of the system that was broken. So how can we ensure that corporations that have been built traditionally by men for men are more inclusive and allow women to progress? So we've been doing a lot of work with government. I've also been appointed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on the National Committee for Gender Equality. We've given a lot of support and advice to governments at the municipal, provincial, and federal level on things that needed to change for women to contribute more effectively. But not only women, and I would say diversity as a whole. We do take into account women who are also with diverse backgrounds, and we've built for almost 5 years ago now, with the pro bono support of McKinsey & Company, the largest consulting firm in the world, a parity certification. And the goal of this certification is to support organizations that want to close the gender gap in the workplace. We measure the situation relative to gender equality from entry level all the way to the executive committee and to the board. And our goal is to ensure organizations have sustainable policies that will allow women to progress. And we've had huge success with this across Canada, with major organizations that have enrolled in this. We've launched in the United States, and I'm very excited to announce that actually Zoom, the video conferencing, we're not on Zoom today, but we're spending most of our days on Zoom they've enrolled in our certification process to close the gender gap in the workplace among Zoom employees. So there's definitely an appetite to do the right thing. Actually, the American Business Roundtable, for the first time this year, have spoken about the importance of diversity and inclusion. And although usually they only talk about shareholders, for once they were a lot more decisive in ensuring that all of the society was able to contribute to. So the Business Roundtable has really done something historic. And we've seen a lot of pension plans. We've seen a lot of institutional investors also be very vocal about the importance of gender equality and diversity. So they will not invest their money into organizations that don't have women on their boards, for instance. So the New York pension plan, which is one of the largest pension plans in the States, or the Canada pension plan, which is the largest one in Canada, are now very strict in where they're going to put their money. The ILN, which is the Investment Leadership Network, is composed of 14 institutional investors in Canada, in the US, in Europe, are now also, they have three main pillars to their initiative, which is sustainable infrastructure, environment, and gender equality. So I see this in a very positive light. The NASDAQ also recently announced that they were going to frown upon many of these stock exchanges and investors have been frowning upon organizations that are not moving the needle. And I will just end on one quite shocking stat, which is out of 600 plus publicly traded organizations in Canada, 170 don't even have one woman sitting on their board. So the situation is real. We before the pandemic, we're 180 years away from reaching full gender equality. We're probably losing 20 or 30 years because of the pandemic.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, I think what both Caroline and Betrand have said is extremely important and very interesting. Just to pinpoint on what Caroline just were talking about, I represent, I'm coming from a country in which gender equality and parity of women and men is a political goal since, decades, many decades. And yeah, within the political discussion, that was, always a very, very central topic. In all kind of parties have been, also behind this and so on and so forth. So I think before the pandemic, the expectation of that was that this struggle is going to continue, and we are, working on developing measures that actually realize this kind of parity and gender equality. But when you see that suddenly such pandemic appears, and as Caroline just said, travels 30 to 40 years back in time, and I mean, how could we see that? How could we foresee that? I mean, well, the most of us didn't, but some have been, able to develop some kind of crisis scenario also before the pandemic, in which this kind of a wild card was actually discussed, but it wasn't, taken into consideration by political administrative system to discuss, and in fact, it was also not considered as realistic or likely in the sense that they actually wanted to discuss what kind of measures could be developed to encounter this kind of development. That's the reason why we have to develop a kind of early warning system within political administrative system, which are able to work in an absolutely different way than conventional forecast-based modeling things. And I think that's probably the most important learning point from this pandemic, that we can't continue as we did before. And this same example that Betrand pinpointing at with the crisis in 2008 and so on and so forth. It's this, a lot of people have developed scenarios that have address this kind of question, these kind of challenges, but no one have actually been able to develop measures and packets of stimulation or activities that could encounter this kind of thing. So I think the most important lesson to learn from this COVID is that we really have to sit down and simulate a lot of different measures to encounter a spectacular situation in the future. Not necessarily to implement them, but we have to develop a kind of preparedness that when the situation occurs, we can much faster realize some activities that encounter this kind of challenge.
Yeah, thank you. So, it joins back what we were discussing a bit before about early warning system and the importance to link short-term actions to the long-term consequences and to break the silo. This is really at stake. And as Betrand emphasized as well, we have nowadays great technologies, and we can use it to get some great understanding of what will happen in the future. And that's why the solution is not only to use some qualitative techniques as it was traditionally used for the scenarios, but to have this hybridization, human and machine, to have a better understanding of the variables, the inputs, the weights, to have a sharper understanding of the consequences for the short, mid-term, and the long terms. And also, what used to be the long terms is now the short terms. We can see, for instance, that for the vaccine, we used to work on minimum for 10 years to make one vaccine, and look at the result now. It's only 1 year. So the question of time also is very important, because what used to be long term is now the short term, and that's why I think that we should be some system which makes the hybridization of the human and the machine for the future, but the future can be tomorrow, after tomorrow, 6 months after, and also if something very important happens in the very short term, will not have a very long-term perspective. So that's why we need to work on that. On my side, that's what I'm trying to do. And we develop new fields, new system based on that, what we call decision intelligence. So we use machine learning, we use the machine, the power of the machine, intelligence of the machine at the beginning of the system, and at the end we give it, we give the result to the human for interpretation, analysis, and for better action that should lead to sustainability. Very important point as well that Betrand started talking about is about the change, the needed, the change that we need to do, because we need to make a paradigm shift. So will it come from an elite, or do you believe that this change will come from, let's say, middle class? Or what do you think about that, Caroline?
Well, I think a lot of the changes that we've been seeing have been led by activists or by base. It's not necessarily our top thought leaders that have been leading the way. We've seen how social media is playing an important role on how people are behaving, what people are thinking. It's actually getting very dangerous, because you may have seen the documentary about social media and how it's supporting you in whatever your views are. So if you are someone who believes in Trump, then you're only going to see pro-Trump posts. And if you're pro-Biden, then you're only going to see pro-Biden posts. So your views of the world become distorted in the way that, in the sense that you believe that everyone around you thinks like you. And then the minute that someone thinks differently, it becomes such a polarized discussion. And it seems that there are no grays anymore. You're either black or white, you're either for or against. And what I'm finding very difficult these days is not to be able to have discussions that, you know, will actually get you to think in a more strategic way, and to get a better understanding of what the other person thinks, because they don't allow it. It becomes so, you're condemned for thinking differently. You're not, there's no space for diversity of thought, which to me is extremely concerning. And we've been seeing this in an increasing fashion. I'm also concerned for our youth, because that has sort of become, so integrated into their lives. And I've had the opportunity twice to do interviews with Hillary Clinton after she lost the election. And in her book, What Happened, she talks very clearly about how social media has negatively impacted her. And there are chatbots that have disseminated fake news about her. And even when you see how traditional media used to portray her, it is so different from the woman that I met in Toronto and in Montreal. We did an interview in front of 6,000 people who were cheering for her, who were, on her side, obviously. So it was a very positive discussion. But she was very hurt and wounded by what just happened. She should have won those elections, and instead she was being accused of all sorts of things, including absurdities. Like, for instance, you may have heard of the Pizzagate, where all of a sudden they were making people believe that she was running a pedophile operation in the basement of a pizza store, where her and her team would go and buy their pizzas for when they used to work late, which was pretty much every night during the campaign. So the absurdity of things like this that can be just disseminated through social media and through this very unique thought, la pensée unique, for me, it's a huge concern. And just a quick segue into something that recently happened in Montreal with the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. Some of you may have heard of elections at the board level following the dismissal of the general director of the museum. And just to illustrate the single thought that you can have on a board, where even if you had in this case, gender diversity, everybody had the same, I would say, socioeconomic background, mainly big donors, and all felt that it was fine to fire a director general who had multiplied by exponentially, I can't even tell you by how much, but the membership, the number of exhibitions, etc. So she was let go. It's in a very, I would say, in a very shocking manner by the chair of the board, who substituted himself into that role by interim. And everybody on the board was fine with that, because they were all in that same train of thought that we all agree, and we don't discuss, and we don't try to bring up some diverse perspectives or ask questions. And so we, myself and 3 other women, did a big campaign, which was very similar to any political campaign, to get elected on that board and block 3 men who were trying to get re-elected. And when usually you have 50 people who come and vote at this annual General Assembly, there was 1,480 who showed up this time. So I think there is a trend of wanting to do the right thing, wanting to intervene when people are erring this way and making big mistakes that are negatively impacting a whole community. So that to me was a victory, to be able to actually, when they say vox populi, the population was able to give their word and take concrete action to change things. So that reassures me.
Thank you very much. Eric, so what do you think about who will trigger the change? Do you believe that will be an elite, some guys that you can meet also on your site quite frequently, or do you think that it will come more from people from the World Future City Federation, for instance, from, let's say, middle class activists, as Caroline mentioned? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, if you put it like that, Christophe, I'm very tempted to say that, well, if 2 million people would be members of the World Future Study Federation, everything would turn out to be okay. But, well, I won't say that. No, I think that the future evolution, if I may put it in abbreviations, is both from bottom and it's from the middle, and in certain case also from a certain kind of elite. I mean, this could be a technological elite, but it could also be emergent political groups that are today a very small one, but that could, develop. Personally, I've been involving, or I've been tried out some thoughts in that direction and created a concept that I call universal perspectivism, in the sense that we need a new kind of universal orientation, which also take the insight from the postmodern and the post developments for the last decades seriously. So I won't elaborate on that, but I think you really have to reinvent how we are making democracy possible, and how we are creating political administrative system in the future. Because what we are experiencing just in the current situation is that it's turning everything upside down. I had the pleasure of reading the last books of Timothy Schneider, and when reading his brilliant analysis of the history and also the current situation with the social medias and so on and so forth, it makes this what appears to us as craziness. Caroline just talked about her interview with Hillary Clinton, which is only one example of how crazy ideas that lots of people think have a confidence to launch crazy ideas in the public and follow them. And you see that with your current president in the USA. I mean, how he's dealing with the post-election is unbelievable. And most of the people think that that's also crazy, but a lot of people are following these crazy ideas. And these ideas, it's probably one of the most crazy ideas in the American democracy ever. But the confidence and the reason why that is possible is not accidental, in my opinion. It's a systematic work of a lot of different technologies, a lot of different neo-fascist groups that are coming together, and so on and so forth. So it's a kind of a political movement, so to say, which is not addressed very clearly yet. And this, in my opinion, has to be encountered with a political encountering movement, in the sense that we have to organize ourselves in a quite a different way. For example, making algorithm system that is very critical to political perspectives that are challenging the rule of law, for example, and things like that. So we have to, that are defending basic democratic values and democratic attitudes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, so indeed. So Elie Pariser mentioned some issues regarding some algorithm, what he called the bubble filters. So people are surrounded by what they want to see, what they want to hear, and unfortunately, it has been proven that people have a trend to believe very quickly the so-called fake news, and every day everybody is reading fake news. It's more and more difficult to perceive what is real to what is not real. There is also the deep fake, using the deep learning techniques behind that. That's amazing. Okay, so you can take a picture of someone, and you with the picture, like La Joconde, for instance, from Leonardo da Vinci, so you can make La Joconde to speak. Okay, so there are big challenges, a huge threat on the so-called democracy, and even though we can have access to a lot of information, this access to a huge amount of information can be a threat at the end to democratic system, because if the guys control that, at the end they can manipulate and make the people to vote for who they want, and therefore at the end it appears to be a kind of democracy, but it is not. And we have really to fight for that. We have to raise our voice for that, and I believe that countries in Europe and others, we have to gather for that, because now there is a real concern. There is a real threat on the future of the so-called democracy. Even though it appears to be a democracy, at the end it will not be a democracy. Okay, so yeah, so So for you, so when talking about that, so Eric, you starting about it, and also Caroline. But what can be the concrete actions to tackle the necessary challenges and changes that we need to do today with this pandemic? This pandemic revealed many things to us. So what we should do, Caroline?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to do is raising awareness that we really need to make sure people are conscious of the situation, of what's going on. It's you know, it's interesting to think that it's probably what has caused all these issues with the social media, and it's probably what could save us, because if we ensure that through social media we are disseminating this information, getting people engaged into a conversation that makes them realize what is going on. There's also dangers that come from dictatorship countries. This is a reality. During the last American elections, between Trump and Hillary Clinton, Russia played a big role in the loss of Hillary. So the danger also comes from there, and we've seen that Russia has also tried to intervene in the French elections. When Macron was elected, they were pushing for Madame Le Pen. So it's I'm not sure I've got any clear solution in my head, other than making sure that the power goes back to the people who right now think that they have the power, the people on the street. We've seen big protests more than ever. We've seen how they are demanding change. We just need to make sure that they realize that in certain part they are being manipulated as well. So all the demands that are emanating from the younger generation in terms of environment, for instance, this is wonderful movements. It needs to actually yield results, because otherwise they just get the impression that they're walking with banners and that they're asking for concrete things. And then if governments and countries are just withdrawing themselves from the Paris Accord, nothing is actually really I guess that's it's the conversations, it's the younger generation, it's the way that we educate our children in terms of what their demands are. But there is one danger that I do see through all this activism, is those people who are actually removing any historic how can I put this? For instance, we're all for, obviously, myself first, for diversity and inclusion. We're all against anything that's happened for the Black communities, all that they've gone through. The Black Lives Matter movement is so key to making us a more inclusive society. But where I find maybe things might go too far is we go into a cancel culture, where we refuse to talk about any prominent historic figure that may have harmed a certain community. I find that dangerous. I find it important that today we talk about what our culture, what our society's values should look like, but what historically has happened cannot just disappear. And removing certain statues, which we've seen here in Montreal, there are young people who just went into parks and covered statues in paint, and actually even debolted them and made them fall and break. We need to be careful where we go, but I think it's quite clear that the street has a lot of power and needs to be simply really made aware of all the issues, and use their power in a very smart way to bring us to where we will be more sustainable, and collectively, for the collective good as well.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, I think Caroline make a couple of very good points. The first is, of course, that we have to be aware of the situation and have to actually look into and analyze the situation in a much better way than we've been able to do before. In my opinion, a lot of discussions in the public, political discussion and so on and so forth, is marked by a certain kind of naivism. I mean, what we are experiencing today is not accidentally emerged. It's really hard work by a lot of people who are enforcing these, what I would say, some kind of forces threatening the conventional viewpoint of what democracy is and should be. And when that is said, I also agree very much with Caroline that the cancel culture and identity policy approaches doesn't help at all. I mean, that isn't the way to go. I mean, it's okay. As a futurist, I have a kind of a pragmatic approach to time. And say that also open for if in the future we could view the past in a different way than we do today, for example. And that's, to say that Churchill or, some heroes of the past was a bit racist. I think that doesn't help us very much to go into that kind of discussion, although in some cases could help us to discuss what we should do today or not do today. That could be the case. So I think what we really need is to develop and create a new social political movement, which the world never have seen before. So I think that's probably one of the most important things, and the content of that movement I can't elaborate very much on here, but that's about in every case that's ideas that I've been dealing with also in my research for a while, and I think I'm going to get back to that by another occasion. But I think as a futurist, you see political conflict line as they are today, and in the future there would be other conflict line. And in 30 years and 20 years time, we discuss a lot of other things that we do today. So, and what could this new future conflict line be? How are the political discourses organized in 20 or 30 years time? I think we should address that question thoroughly.
Yeah, thank you. So education is, of course, a very important point, and also the big tech companies also should make some changes. There was a question about it from Dexter. So Dexter is rising. What happened at Google recently that fired the AI ethics team lead Gebru, where she was raising questions about some Google's core products being harmful. So indeed, so the system should prevent some actions that could potentially harm democracy, and of course the big tech companies are participating hugely to the education of the world population, and that's a very important point to address. Indeed, also then for the future of democracy, so with Eric we'll make a special issue about that. That's a fascinating topic. So also there is a call for a new system, a call for a new capitalism, because Bertrand mentioned Milton Friedman, so the profit for the profit. But if we make profit today and we destroy everything for tomorrow, indeed, at the end, there will be no profit for anybody. So we are reaching slowly the end of this great panel and amazing discussions. So as a final point, Caroline, what would you say?
Well, as final points, I would say that I think we're at a time where we all know what the right thing to do is. So the mentalities have evolved tremendously. Everybody agrees that sustainable governance is key for our societies to thrive, that no one can be left behind. And that to me is very reassuring. Now, the fact that the pandemic is setting us so much behind is more concerning. But these conversations, I think all this awareness that we are raising are bringing us towards our closer to our goal. So I'm one who always remains optimistic, doing a lot of work not only with women but also men. I think men have a huge role to play on the gender equality piece. It's not just women for women about women. It's really us working together at achieving our goals. So I will leave on a very optimistic note that we are going in the right direction, and the awareness needs to continue.
Thank you very much. Eric?
Yeah, I can only second Caroline's optimistic baseline here. I share that. And when I'm saying that, I'm not, it's not that I'm not aware of the forces, what I call it, it's popping up. But I also believe in that we are able to develop some kind of uncountering policy mobilization towards what's going on at the time. And also to defend basic democratic principles, rule of law, and so on and so forth. I think that's probably some of the most important thing that we could do at the time being. And when that is said, it's we need quite a different system for early warning and anticipation within political administrative system. They have to, as counselors for governments around the world, they really have to create a different structure to deal with strategic, political, long-term issues than they have today. And we see a tendency that a lot of administration around the world are changing their close system in that sense. For example, Germany, they are establishing a new department within the primary office that are dealing with long-term and doing future reasoning and foresight. Very close to where political decisions are being made. And you see that in Finland, you see in South Korea, and I can mention a lot of different countries that are really changing the whole system. So they are trying to develop a kind of anticipatory system close to the political administrative decision-making actors. So I think that's one of the most important things that we can follow up now. But on the baseline, I'm positive. I see also a lot of positive tendencies. You see, for example, in Britain, the reaction now against the Brexit background, and also regarding the election of the post-electoral time in the US with Donald Trump. I think you see that that people are reacting against it too, but they need to formulate how they should organize, and that's not formulated yet. So we have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So there are some great challenges. Of course, there is hope, but we have to raise our voice to fight against these forces. And it's not only in some countries, it's not only in local places. We have to do that all around the world. And as we all know, because we had the chance to travel in many countries in the world, and we have the chance to be part of amazing discussion and meetings, people in the world are more or less the same everywhere. So we aspire to the same things all around the world. And we have to really to fight for the good, not only in specific places, not only to make one country great again, but we have to join together and make the world great again. Okay, so that's very important. And and also we have to break the silo. We have to break also this lack of communication among countries, among the different kinds of people, to integrate all the diversity in the world, which is a great wealth. And we have also to build early warning system for the short, the mid, and the long term. That's very important, and I really believe that the machine is very important for that, to create something that is great, not only for some people, not only for one elite, but for the majority of people. And we have to fight for that. But we have to be aware as well that perhaps if we are not careful enough, that perhaps we are the only one, let's say, the last generation that can tackle these things now, if we are not very careful about this. Yeah, so thank you very much for these fascinating discussions, and hopefully the world will be great again. So thank you very much to you. Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation, Chris.